My name is Ethan Walker, and I am 28 years old, the owner of a small garage in Millbrook, Ohio, a place where time moves slowly and dreams often rust away like the old cars I spend my days fixing. This evening, I found myself under the hood of a 1987 Ford pickup truck, its engine coughing and wheezing like an old man on his deathbed. My hands, stained black with grease and oil, told the story of my life. Every callus, every scar, every line carved by honest work that others in my family would never understand. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the concrete floor scattered with tools and spare parts. This garage was my sanctuary, the only place where I felt truly competent, where broken things could be made whole again. Unlike the fractured relationships that defined my family, engines followed logic. If you understood them, respected them, they would run for you. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My mother, Margaret, appeared in the doorway, her silhouette framed against the dying light outside. She held an envelope in her hands, and I could see from her expression that it carried weight beyond its simple appearance. Her graying hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her worn dress spoke of years spent stretching every dollar, years spent raising me alone after my father disappeared into his own selfish pursuits. "Ethan," she said softly, her voice carrying that gentle strength that had sustained us both through countless difficult nights. "This came in the mail today. It's from Uncle Gerald's lawyer." I wiped my hands on a rag that had seen better days and took the envelope. The law firm's letterhead felt expensive between my fingers, a stark contrast to the rough texture of my work-worn hands. Inside was an invitation to the reading of Gerald Walker's will, scheduled for the following Thursday at his estate. Uncle Gerald had been the family's golden child, the one who built an empire from nothing while the rest of us struggled to make ends meet. He owned half the commercial real estate in 3 counties, drove cars that cost more than most people's houses, and lived in a mansion that could have housed 20 families like mine. Yet despite his wealth, despite the distance between our worlds, Gerald had always treated me with a respect I never received from the rest of the family. "Are you going to attend?" my mother asked, settling into the plastic chair I kept by my workbench for the rare occasions when someone visited me here. I stared at the invitation, feeling the familiar weight of dread that accompanied any family gathering. "What's the point, Mom? You know how these things go. Tyler will strut around like he owns the place, which he probably will soon enough. Charles will show up looking for whatever scraps he can grab. And I'll sit in the corner, the family disappointment, waiting for it to be over." Margaret's eyes filled with that mixture of pride and pain that I had seen so many times before. "Your Uncle Gerald always saw something special in you, Ethan. Even when you were just a boy, he would watch you work on things, fix things that others had given up on. He respected your hands, your honesty." "That was a long time ago," I said. But even as I spoke the words, I remembered those summer afternoons when Gerald would visit our small house. While Tyler would perform for the adults with his practiced charm, Gerald would find me in the backyard, tinkering with some broken appliance or toy. He never talked down to me, never made me feel like my interests were somehow less valuable than Tyler's achievements. The envelope trembled slightly in my hands, and I realized how much I both feared and longed for this moment. Part of me hoped that Gerald might have remembered me in his will, might have left some small token that would validate the quiet respect I had always felt between us. But a larger part of me, the part scarred by years of being overlooked, expected nothing but another opportunity for humiliation.
Thursday arrived with the kind of gray November morning that matched my mood perfectly. I had borrowed my neighbor's least damaged shirt and spent 20 minutes scrubbing the grease from under my fingernails, knowing full well that my efforts would never be enough to mask who I really was. The drive to Gerald's estate took me through neighborhoods where each house grew larger and more imposing until I finally reached the wrought iron gates that guarded my uncle's world. The mansion rose before me like something from a different century, its stone facade weathered but dignified, its tall windows reflecting the cloudy sky like unblinking eyes. Everything about this place spoke of permanence, of wealth that had roots deeper than my understanding. I parked my battered Honda between a gleaming Mercedes and a BMW, feeling like an intruder in my own family's gathering. The front door opened before I could knock, revealing Tyler Walker in all his polished glory. My cousin had inherited the family's tendency toward height and sharp features, but where those same genetics had left me looking perpetually tired and rough around the edges, Tyler wore them like expensive tailoring. His dark hair was perfectly styled, his smile practiced and cold, his suit probably worth more than I made in 3 months. "Well, well," Tyler said, his voice carrying that familiar note of amused condescension. "If it isn't our resident grease monkey. Did you remember to wash your hands, cousin? We wouldn't want you leaving fingerprints on Uncle Gerald's furniture." I forced myself to remain calm, remembering my mother's words about dignity. "Hello, Tyler. I'm sorry for your loss." "Our loss," he corrected, though his tone suggested he wasn't particularly grieved. "Though I suppose some of us are losing more than others. Come on in, Ethan. Try not to track any oil on the Persian rugs." The interior of Gerald's house was exactly as I remembered from my childhood visits, elegant without being ostentatious, comfortable despite its obvious expense. Dark wood panels lined the walls, interrupted by tasteful artwork and family photographs that chronicled decades of Walker family history. I found myself searching those photos for my own face and finding it rarely. My mother sat in the living room, wearing her best dress and the expression of someone trying very hard to belong where she wasn't entirely welcome. She brightened when she saw me, adding the cushion beside her on the sofa. Around the room, other family members clustered in small groups, their conversations dying as I entered. "Ethan!" The voice belonged to Aunt Patricia, Gerald's younger sister, who approached with the kind of forced enthusiasm that barely concealed her discomfort. How are you doing, dear? Still working at that little garage of yours?" "I own that little garage," I corrected gently, though I knew the distinction would be lost on her. Patricia had never worked a day in her life, having married into even greater wealth than she'd been born to. Before she could respond, the front door opened again, and a figure I had hoped never to see again stepped inside. Charles Walker, my father, looked older than his 52 years old. His once dark hair was now streaked with premature gray, his face bearing the marks of disappointment and poor choices. He wore a cheap suit that didn't quite fit properly, and his eyes darted around the room like those of a man looking for opportunity or escape. "Charles," my mother said, her voice flat with old hurt, "I didn't expect to see you here." "Margaret," he replied, nodding in her direction before his gaze found mine. "Ethan, you've grown." "It's been 8 years. People tend to do that."
Tyler watched this exchange with obvious amusement, clearly enjoying the dysfunction that my father's presence brought to the gathering. "Well," he said loudly enough for the entire room to hear, "looks like the whole family's here now. Gerald always did have a soft spot for strays and lost causes." Victoria Hayes commanded attention the moment she entered Gerald's study. The lawyer was a woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled into a severe bun and glasses that reflected the room's warm lighting. She carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to dealing with grief, greed, and family drama in equal measure. Her briefcase was old, but well-maintained, much like its owner, and she set it on Gerald's massive oak desk with practiced efficiency. "Thank you all for coming," she said, her voice carrying easily through the room, despite its conversational tone.
I know this is a difficult time, but Gerald was very specific about how he wanted his affairs handled. If everyone could please take a seat, we'll begin. The study was Gerald's most personal space, lined floor to ceiling with books that showed actual signs of being read. His desk dominated the room, a monument to decades of successful business dealings, while family photographs clustered on the side tables like silent witnesses to this final gathering. I found myself sitting between my mother and an empty chair, acutely aware that Tyler had positioned himself directly across from me, as if he wanted to watch my face during the proceedings. Victoria opened a thick folder and adjusted her glasses. Gerald Walker executed this will 6 months ago, and I want to assure everyone that it is legally binding and reflects his final wishes. Gerald was of sound mind and body when these documents were prepared, and he made his decisions deliberately. She began reading in the formal language of legal documents, but the meaning was clear enough. Gerald's real estate holdings, the office buildings, the shopping centers, the residential developments, would be divided primarily between Tyler and 2 other cousins who had built their lives around impressing him. His stock portfolio, his business interests, his expensive cars, all of it flowing to family members who had courted his favor with Christmas cards and birthday calls and carefully planned visits. Tyler's smile grew wider with each allocation, and he made no attempt to hide his satisfaction. At one point, when Victoria announced that Tyler would inherit Gerald's prized Jaguar collection, my cousin actually chuckled. "Uncle Gerald always did have excellent taste," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I sat quietly, my hands folded in my lap, feeling smaller with each passing minute. This was exactly what I had expected, exactly what Tyler's smirk had promised. The family fortune would go to those who had played the game properly, who understood the rules of wealth and influence that had always been foreign to me. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you're enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My mother reached over and squeezed my hand, her touch warm and reassuring, even as I watched my cousin inherit what seemed like half of Ohio. Charles leaned forward in his chair, his eyes following every word as if he were calculating potential opportunities, potential claims he might be able to make. The monetary accounts, including savings, checking, and investment funds, totaling approximately $2.3 million, are to be distributed as follows. More names, more allocations, none of them mine. Tyler would receive the largest single share naturally, along with Patricia and her children, along with cousins I barely knew who lived in other states but had maintained the proper relationships. I found myself studying the family photographs on Gerald's desk, wondering if he had thought about these moments when those pictures were taken. Had he already decided, even then, who deserved his legacy and who didn't? The evidence seemed clear enough. Victoria paused in her reading, reaching for a glass of water that someone had thoughtfully provided. In that moment of silence, Tyler caught my eye and offered the kind of smile that suggested he was genuinely enjoying my discomfort. "Don't look so glum, cousin," he said in a stage whisper. "I'm sure Uncle Gerald remembered you somehow. Maybe he left you his old toolbox." Several family members chuckled at this, and I felt heat rising in my cheeks. My mother's hand tightened on mine, and I could see the anger flashing in her eyes, though she held her tongue as she had learned to do over so many years of these gatherings. Victoria cleared her throat and returned to her papers. "And finally," she said, her voice taking on a slightly different tone, "there is one more page to Gerald's will, a final provision that he insisted be read last." The room grew quiet in a way that felt different from the previous silences. Victoria's expression had changed subtly, and she handled the final page of Gerald's will with something approaching reverence. Even Tyler's confident smile wavered slightly as he sensed the shift in atmosphere. "To my nephew, Ethan Walker, I leave the property located at 1247 Maple Creek Road, including the house, barn, and all 47 acres, along with the contents therein. This property is to be his alone, with no liens, no conditions, and no obligations to share with any other family member. The silence that followed was profound. I felt as though the ground had shifted beneath my feet, as though the very air in the room had changed composition. 47 acres? A house? I had never even heard Gerald mention property on Maple Creek Road. Tyler's laugh cut through the silence like a blade. Maple Creek Road? That old farm? Uncle Gerald, you sly dog. You gave the grease mechanic the one piece of worthless property in your entire portfolio. Oh, this is perfect. Absolutely perfect. Ethan gets the old farmhouse that's probably falling down, and I get everything else? I love it. But Victoria wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued, Gerald left a personal letter to be read aloud as part of these proceedings. She opened a sealed envelope, unfolding a sheet of paper covered in Gerald's familiar handwriting. Dear Ethan, she began, and Tyler's laughter gradually died away. If you are hearing these words, then I am gone, and you are surrounded by family members who have probably spent the last hour demonstrating exactly why I made the decisions I did. Over the years, I have watched our family, and I have seen how wealth changes people, how the promise of inheritance can turn relatives into performers, each trying to play the role they think I want to see. You never played that role, Ethan. When you were a boy, you showed me who you really were. Honest, hard-working, someone who found dignity in fixing things rather than breaking them. While others courted my favor with calculated visits and holiday cards, you treated me like family, like a person rather than a bank account. The property I am leaving you is not worthless, despite what others might say. It was the first land I ever bought, purchased with money I earned working construction when I was barely older than you are now. I have kept it all these years as a reminder of where I came from. And I am giving it to you because you alone among our family have never forgotten where you come from. The house may need work, but it has good bones. The land is fertile and holds possibilities that others cannot see. Most importantly, it comes with no expectations except that you be yourself, the man I have always known you to be.
Victoria paused, and in that pause, I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Around the room, faces that had been indulgent or amused now showed confusion, surprise, and in Tyler's case, something approaching genuine concern. In the barn, Victoria continued reading, you will find additional documentation regarding this property, including surveys, mineral rights, and other paperwork that will help you understand the full scope of what I am leaving you. You will also find some personal items that I hope will help you remember not just my faith in you, but your own worth. Do not let anyone convince you to sell this land or share it with those who have never earned it. It is yours by right of character, not blood. Build something meaningful on it, Ethan. Build something that lasts. The letter was signed simply, Your Uncle Gerald. Tyler's face had gone pale. Mineral rights? He said, his voice no longer carrying its earlier confidence. What mineral rights? That land is worthless. It's just fields and trees. But I could see in his eyes that he was no longer certain. And for the first time in my life, I watched my cousin struggle with doubt while I felt something like hope blooming in my chest.
The study erupted into chaos the moment Victoria finished reading Gerald's letter. Voices rose and overlapped as family members processed the implications of what they had just heard. Tyler shot to his feet, his practiced composure finally cracking like ice in the spring. "This is ridiculous," he declared, his voice pitched higher than usual. "That property has been sitting empty for years. Uncle Gerald never even mentioned it. There has to be some mistake." Victoria calmly returned the papers to her folder. "I assure you, Mr. Walker, there is no mistake. Gerald was very specific about this bequest, and he updated his will only 6 months ago to ensure these instructions were clear." Charles had also risen from his chair, and I could see the wheels turning behind his eyes as he calculated potential opportunities. "Now wait just a minute," he said, moving closer to where I sat. "Ethan is my son. If there are mineral rights involved, if this property has real value, then as his father—" "You're not his father," my mother said, her voice cutting through the room with unprecedented strength. "A father doesn't abandon his family when times get difficult. A father doesn't show up only when there's money to be made." I stared at her in amazement. In all the years since Charles had left us, I had never heard my mother speak with such fierce authority. Her normally gentle demeanor had transformed into something formidable, something that reminded me why she had managed to raise me alone despite every obstacle our circumstances had thrown at us. Charles said, "Margaret, let's not air old grievances. We're family. If Ethan has inherited something valuable, then we should work together to—" "We?" I found my own voice at last, standing to face the men who had contributed nothing to my life except disappointment. "You walked out on us 8 years ago, Charles. You don't get to walk back in now because you smell money." Tyler began pacing behind his chair, his movements sharp and agitated. "This is insane. Uncle Gerald was obviously not thinking clearly. 47 acres of farmland, mineral rights? It's probably worth more than some of the commercial properties he gave the rest of us. This isn't fair." "Fair?" The word came out louder than I intended, carrying years of accumulated frustration. "You want to talk about fair, Tyler? You who inherited your trust fund at 18 while I was working 2 jobs to help my mother pay rent? You who got the college education, the family connections, the business opportunities handed to you on a silver platter?" My cousin's face flushed red. "I worked for everything I have. I built relationships. I showed respect. I proved myself worthy of Uncle Gerald's trust. What have you ever done except get your hands dirty and feel sorry for yourself?"
"What I've done," I said, stepping closer to him, "is lived my life without expecting handouts from anyone. What I've done is supported my mother instead of abandoning her when things got tough. What I've done is earned every dollar I've ever made with honest work." "Gentlemen," Victoria interjected, her lawyer's instincts clearly sensing the potential for things to turn physical. "I understand this is emotional, but Gerald's will is legally binding. The property belongs to Ethan Walker, with no conditions or requirements to share ownership." Patricia, who had been silent throughout the exchange, finally spoke up. "But surely there must be some provision for the family. Gerald always talked about keeping the Walker legacy together. He wouldn't want to see us fighting like this." "Maybe," I said, my voice steadying as I found my footing in this strange new reality. "Uncle Gerald knew exactly what would happen when he gave me this inheritance. Maybe he wanted to see who would show their true colors." The room fell quiet again, but it was a different kind of silence now, charged with resentment and calculation. I could see family members looking at me with new eyes, measuring me against the possibility that I might suddenly be worth their attention. Charles made one more attempt. "Son, I know we have our differences, but I am still your father. Legally speaking, you might want to consider—" "Legally speaking, you signed away any claim to influence my decisions when you signed the divorce papers and walked out. And personally speaking, you lost the right to call me son the day you chose your own interests over your family's welfare." Tyler slumped back into his chair,
his earlier smugness replaced by something approaching genuine distress. For the first time, I realized that my cousin might not be quite as financially secure as his appearance suggested. His reaction to potentially losing something valuable seemed too intense for someone who had just inherited millions. My mother stood and moved to my side, her hand finding my arm. "Gerald saw in you what I've always seen. He saw a man who doesn't need to tear others down to build himself up. He saw someone worthy of trust." I looked around the room at faces I had known my entire life, faces that had watched me struggle and stumble and somehow managed to survive, and I realized that something fundamental had shifted. For the first time in my life, I held power in this family, and the weight of that responsibility was terrifying and exhilarating. "I think," I said finally, "I need to see this property for myself before I make any decisions about anything." The drive to Maple Creek Road led me through countryside I had never explored, past rolling hills dotted with weathered barns and fields that lay dormant under November's gray sky. When I finally found the property, my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't the crumbling ruin Tyler had predicted. It was a 2-story farmhouse with white clapboard siding and a wraparound porch surrounded by ancient oak trees that stood like sentinels against the wind. Inside, I discovered Gerald's hidden life. The rooms were furnished simply but comfortably, everything clean and maintained as if he had been here recently. On the mantelpiece sat photographs I had never seen. Gerald as a young man, working construction, covered in the same kind of honest dirt that had always marked my own hands. In a wooden box on his desk, I found journals spanning decades, filled with his thoughts about family, success, and the weight of wealth. One entry stopped me cold. "Watched Ethan fix Margaret's car today. The boy has gifted hands and an honest heart. He reminds me who I was before money complicated everything. He's the only one who sees me, not my bank account."
"So, this is your kingdom," he said, climbing the steps with practiced arrogance. "Congratulations, cousin. You've inherited a house that needs paint and land that grows nothing but weeds." But I could see the calculation in his eyes, the way he surveyed the property like a predator. "What do you want, Tyler?" "I want to make you an offer," he said, settling into the porch swing uninvited. "A partnership. You clearly don't have the capital to develop this place properly. I do. We split everything 50-50. "No." His mask slipped slightly. "Don't be stupid, Ethan. You're a mechanic. What do you know about land development, about mineral rights, about maximizing potential? You need me." "I need to honor Gerald's wishes," I said. "He left this to me for a reason." Tyler's laugh was bitter. "Gerald was a sentimental old fool, but you don't have to be." Charles appeared the next morning, carrying coffee and what he probably thought was a winning smile. "Son, we need to talk about your future." "My future doesn't involve you," I said, not looking up from the journal I was reading. "I know I made mistakes," he continued, settling beside me on the porch steps. "I was young, stupid, scared of responsibility. But this inheritance changes everything. We could be partners, father and son, building something together." I finally looked at him, seeing the desperation he was trying to hide behind false warmth. "Where were you when Mom was working double shifts to keep our lights on? Where were you when I was 16 and trying to figure out how to be a man without a father to show me? I was trying to build something for us. You were running away, and you're still running, still looking for the easy score instead of doing the hard work." I stood, feeling taller than I ever had in his presence. Gerald's letter said not to let anyone convince me to share this with people who haven't earned it. You haven't earned anything from me. Alone again, I returned to Gerald's final letter,
reading deeper into words I had missed during the chaos of the will reading. He had written about watching our family for years, seeing how money poisoned relationships and turned love into performance. I chose you, Ethan, because you never performed for me. You never calculated what I might want to hear. When you were 8 years old, you told me my new car was too shiny and asked me if I missed having calloused hands. That was the moment I knew you understood something the others had forgotten, that a man's worth isn't measured by what he owns, but by what he builds with his own hands. The tears came then, years of feeling inadequate and overlooked finally releasing in great, shuddering sobs. Gerald had seen me. He had understood what I couldn't even understand about myself, that my refusal to play their games wasn't weakness, it was strength. In the barn, I found the documents he had mentioned. The mineral rights were real, but more than that, the land held possibilities I had never imagined. Wind farms, organic agriculture, renewable energy. Gerald had done his research and left me a roadmap to the future. I returned to town, carrying Gerald's vision and my own newfound confidence. At the family gathering Margaret had organized, I stood before relatives who now looked at me with mixtures of respect, resentment, and curiosity. I'm going to turn the farmhouse into a community workshop, a place where people can learn to fix things, build things, create things with their own hands. The land will support renewable energy projects and sustainable farming. Tyler scoffed, but his words lacked their earlier venom. And how exactly will you fund this noble venture? I smiled, thinking of Gerald's journals, his careful planning, his faith in me. With the resources Uncle Gerald provided, and with work, real work. When Charles approached me afterward, still angling for some piece of my inheritance, I simply shook my head. You taught me something valuable, I told him. You showed me exactly what kind of man I never want to become.
My mother embraced me as the gathering dispersed, her eyes bright with pride. "Gerald would be so proud," she whispered. Standing in the fading light, I realized I had inherited something far more valuable than land or money. I had inherited recognition, purpose, and the freedom to build a legacy worthy of the man who had seen my worth when I couldn't see it myself. The boy who had always felt overlooked had finally found his place, not by changing who he was, but by fully becoming who he had always been meant to be.